In 1977, two aircraft collided on the runway in an airport in Spain that killed 583 people. To this day, it is the deadliest accident in aviation history. That accident actually kicked off decades of research into what makes effective teams. It tells us a lot about what it means to have a highly effective team and why, when everything seems to be going right, that might actually be when you need to be paying the most attention. So today, I want to walk through some of that research and tell you what it means for you and your team. Before we dive in, I do want to say, if you're a regular to this channel, welcome back. And if you're new, my name is Matt Jertson. I'm a former Air Force instructor pilot, former talent and development leader at SpaceX. And I now run a company called Built, where I get to work with some of the most innovative companies on the planet to train their leaders how to build teams capable of solving the world's hardest problems. If you like this video and you or your organization are suffering from these kinds of challenges, please reach out to see if we can help. Okay, so I want to start by going through what some of this original research was right after this accident. Then we're going to expand that into some of the more recent research that was actually done by a woman named Amy Edmondson, who you may have heard of because of her popularization of the term psychological safety. And then finally, I want to bring it back to what this means for your team. So immediately after this accident that killed 583 people, there was all this research done into how teams work together, because these were two 747s. So they weren't individual pilots, right? There was at minimum a pilot, a co-pilot. There's probably a flight engineer and a navigator. And so there were a lot of people that were involved in these discussions. And one of the pieces of research that they did is they wanted to compare, they were trying to compare kind of fatigue and see if fatigue really plays into the effectiveness of teams. And they took these two pilots, a pilot and a co-pilot, they were airline pilots, and they put them in a simulator and ran them through a bunch of stuff. They had not flown together before. They were fresh. They hadn't been out on the road flying. So they put the two people together and put them through a bunch of emergencies in the simulator and saw how many mistakes they were making. They then took another crew, these two pilot, co-pilot that had been flying together for several days as they were out on the road. They were on at the end of like a week of flying a bunch. So they were relatively tired, right? They'd been doing a lot. They put them in the simulator. And I think they were expecting to see that the team that had been out on the road would make more mistakes because they were tired. But what they actually found was that because they were able to work together, because they were used to working together, they were actually able to catch each other's mistakes and they made fewer mistakes. They flew more safely because they were able to work together. So that happened in the 1970s and 80s. Fast forward to the mid-1990s, when Amy Edmondson was a brand new researcher, and she was trying to take this idea of teams that are comfortable working together, making fewer mistakes, and expand it outside of the flying world. And so they were looking in medicine. They looked at surgical teams. So she had all this research that was studying two different sets of data on these surgical teams. One set of data was about the number of mistakes that were made by these surgical teams. And the second set was data on how good these teams were at working together. Did they feel comfortable working together? Were they able to speak up? That kind of thing. And it was at this point that something weird happened. It was something that Amy actually thought was going to end her career. Because what she found, through the second set of data, she was able to chart out which teams worked together better and worse. But then when she took that and compared it to the number of mistakes they were making, what she found was that the teams that were working together better were making more mistakes, not fewer. And that was really strange, right? That's the complete opposite of the conclusion that was reached by the original research. So she's like, oh my gosh, dead end, I'm done. Luckily, she kept looking a little bit more. And this is where she found the key thing. What she realized is that the way they were charting mistakes was in self-reported mistakes. There wasn't something watching these surgical teams and deciding how many mistakes were made. Nurses, doctors were having to actually mark down, we made these mistakes. And so what was actually happening is the medical outcomes of people were better for these, teams that were working together better. But on paper, it looked like they were making more mistakes because they were able to raise their hand and say, we made a mistake. And so that's what was happening. So that's what created this whole idea of psychological safety, right? And where she realized, if we have people that are good working together, where people feel safe, where people feel trusted, yes, mistakes might go up because you're raising your hand and admitting I made a mistake, but the eventual outcomes are going to be better. So there's the flying world, the medical world. What about the corporate world? What does this mean for you and your team? The interesting thing is this lines up exactly with a story from Ford. When Alan Mulally became the CEO of Ford, they had this thing at the executive meeting where they had these traffic lights where they would go around the executive table, and each executive on each of the big initiatives that they were talking about would say whether something's a green light, orange light, or red light. Like green light, things are going good. Orange light, this is at risk. Red, we are truly behind. And in his first meeting, Alan Mulally says, okay, how's everybody doing? And they all said green. Every initiative of the company was green. And he thought that was interesting. He sat back. I forget the exact number, but he said something like, wait a minute, this company is going to lose $12 billion this year, and everything we're doing is going well? What's going on? And what he realized is that this was the culture where there was not a culture of trust, right? Where people felt comfortable speaking up and saying when things are going wrong. And early on, this was in, I think, 2005, 2006, he was able to change that culture so people were willing to admit when things were going bad. He got an accurate representation of what was happening across the team. And thus, Ford was actually one of the most prepared, best capitalized companies going into the 2008 financial crisis, which is why they were the only major car company that didn't declare bankruptcy during the financial crisis. So if you think about creating a trusting environment in your team, the thing that you need to be prepared for is that it might make it look like things are going worse in the short term, because all of a sudden, everybody's going to feel comfortable saying this is what's going wrong. But that's actually exactly what you want. You need people to speak up in that way if you want to be able to get an accurate representation of what is happening. That way you can work together to solve those problems. And eventually that is how you can increase the performance of your team. So it's something to simply be prepared for, right? If everything looks like it's going well, it might not be going well. It might just be a sign that your team isn't willing to speak up when things are going wrong. So that's why it's so critical for you to be able to build that trust so that you can actually solve the problems your team is facing. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.